advertised workshop into session at this time. We do have an agenda, board members, of course, on the top of our desk here, and of course the first item is calling the meeting into session. We've done that. The second item will be the superintendent's report relating to the disposition of the school district's Lowery Place facility and movement of administrative functions to the Niceville Central Complex. And 2.1 will be the review of information presented by Superintendent Chambers. So, Mr. Chambers, turn it over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And as you said, Dr. White, I think at a previous board meeting we had discussed this topic, and we've been asked to look at the disposition of the Lowery Place and then what it might take if we were to look at movement of administration to the central facility. So we do have a presentation that is prepared this morning for informational purposes that I think will equip us all well with the information needed to be as knowledgeable as possible about Lowery Place and also the central facility. So with that being the case, I'd like for Mr. Horton to come forward.
Good morning, Mr. Horton.
Good morning, Dr. White. Good morning, board members. Appreciate your time this morning. And I want to make sure that folks understand that we realize on the front end that there'll be some information we'll be able to provide you today. There'll be some information that we'll be able to provide you following this meeting based on requests of board members. So we appreciate your thoughts on that. With me today helping with the presentation be Dr. Bill Smith, who works in our facilities program and has a vast knowledge of the history of not just the district, but Lowery Place specifically. Steve Bolton's here, who actually is our Director of Facilities and Planning and Maintenance right now. So what I wanted to do, if I could, is kind of take you through a process that for the board members who were not here back in 2017, when I think the latest iteration of kind of Lowery Place developed, we'll do a little bit of a history on what got us to the point that we're at right now, and then kind of launch that into some discussions and thoughts about where we might go from here, okay? So I'm going to let Dr. Smith first just kind of give you a brief history of Lowery Place, and emphasis on brief.
Good morning, Dr. Smith.
Good morning. Lowery Place started a long time ago. Just to give you some brief background of the property as we acquired it. The property was acquired by the Okaloosa County School Board in 1935 from the Brooks family. It was actually a purchase, and it was actually in two different parcels. The front parcel was acquired in 1935. Immediately after that, the WPA built a building on there for us. In 1954, we acquired what we call the back lots. The front piece was a parcel designated on the plat as schools. The back lots were bought additionally as previously platted lots. We have, I think, one time sold a parcel to the church for some parking at one point in time, but that's the only piece I think we've sold. That was approximately 15 years ago. Previously, the building has had multiple uses. It was originally built as either a K-12 or a 112, depending on what it was at that time, but it was a consolidation of a number of one-room, two-room, or three-room schoolhouses in the south end of the county, and it was considered Fort Walton Beach High School. In the early 50s, Choctawhatchee High School, which was built at the MEG site in the early 50s, 9 through 12 went there, so it turned into Fort Walton Beach School. After that closed, and it became the Fort Walton Beach Kindergarten Center. After that closed, and it became the Lowery Place Administrative Complex, as it was 2 years ago when it was when the main building was moved out of. But that's basically the general history. One of the unusual things about the property, as I was looking it up, 1935 we bought the property, built the building. WPA built it in 1937. An engineer sent the chairman of the board a letter saying, you bought the property, but it's not sitting on the description on your deed. So in 1937, there's another deed that corrects that. I think there was just a mistake in the original deed. But anyway, that's basically the background, and I'll let Steve carry you through the more immediate history of what's happened in the last couple of years.
Thank you.
And obviously, as we go through, if you want to stop and have questions, please stop and ask the questions. I did ask Dr. Smith, because I distinctly remember lucking out and being able to attend the Learning Center at the Bayer Office Complex, but we don't have a line item for that, but anyway, that occurred as well. So I want to just kind of bring all the board members up to kind of the same level, and forgive me, my discussion will be not probably as technical as someone who's a certified inspector would be able to say, but I just want to get us to where we are now. Part of the reason is because there was an air quality report, limited fungal assessment, I believe was a term that was done just over 2 years ago, that today, like an appraisal, is not worth much because 2 years have passed. And so as you heard back in that time, results can change from day to day. And so that's just something, but we'll discuss a little bit of that. And Bill does have copies of that again if it's something that board members would like to have again. So going back to March of 2017, there was an announcement at a school board meeting that employees at Lowery Place were going to be relocated to other facilities based on an abundance of caution and due to environmental concerns. And that's kind of what the record reflects from the board meetings and going back and looking at the actual board meetings.
And Mr. Horton, I
Yes,
don't mean
sir.
to interrupt, and I think you'll eventually cover this on the bottom, but I do think it's important for the public and the press and other folks that might be interested to know that we're still utilizing that building, that we still have office functions there located. And at some juncture, we may actually know the square footage of office space that we're still using there. But I want to make sure that folks understand that it's not, the whole area is not sitting vacant, that it is actually being used extensively. And I think I see at the very bottom that you'll cover that
Yes,
in
sir.
just a minute.
Yes, sir, absolutely correct. And so there are multiple buildings on that property, one of them being what we'll refer to as the main building. And then there are some ramps. There is right now a large portable that's also on site that's being used currently. And so it was the superintendent at that time recommendation to relocate employees from inside of the administrative complex at Lowery Place, that
What we
one
call the
facility.
main building.
The main building.
Right.
And so those folks were moved initially to OTC, Okaloosa Technical College, and set up in some at the time was determined to be temporary space that was available at that school. So you'll see in the first week of April of 2017, HR did move to that from the main building at Lowery Place to Okaloosa Technical College. The board secretaries and the board members, and you'll know that very well, that we relocated to Central Complex, which is here in Niceville, to begin having our board workshops and meetings here and house our board office functions. As Dr. White says, at that time, the outbuildings, the ramp locations that housed finance, the portable that houses insurance, our career technical education department, the print shop and print shop functions, an ESE records room, and the Public Schools Foundation, which has office space there and employees there, as well as some custodial staff, all remained at Lowery Place in locations other than that main building. And I'll go over with you kind of the thought process that seemed to exist at the time to have those folks stay in those locations. When we get to the April 6th, April 10th board workshop and board meeting, there was continued discussion of Lowery Place. And again, all those are, for the public who's interested, able to go on to our website and view those workshops and minutes in their entirety. And also view the minutes. There was a motion offered at that meeting, and it was subsequently amended slightly, but then approved, that called for two things at that time. So we're talking about April 10th, 2017. One, a credentialed examination of Lowery Place to include environmental concerns, remediation costs, and an expeditious plan to reoccupy Lowery Place, staff offices, and school board meeting room, either totally or in part. And two, an appraisal of the property value at Lowery Place and any impediments to transfer, such as historical status, zoning, or other such concerns. So that was a motion the board made back and approved back in April of 2017. I will say now, to avoid the spoiler alert, that one has not to this date been completely done. And I know you as board members would be aware of that. An appraisal was conducted on the property at that time, and I believe the board members were notified of that. And I'll have Bill speak briefly in terms of the second part of that, in terms of impediments to transfer. At that board meeting, board members, the minutes reflect that you were informed that PSI, Professional Services Industries, had been contracted by the district at the direction of the then superintendent to conduct air quality testing and environmental assessments on the buildings at Lowery. All right, so that was, at the time of this board meeting, underway. At the following board workshop, following that workshop, because I believe at the time of that workshop, the board members had yet to be provided with that report, but I believe Mr. Walker had made a request for it, and so I believe board members were provided with a copy of that PSI limited fungal assessment report. And for the new board members, Dr. Smith does have copies of that report that he's certainly willing to pass out to you today or after the workshop. There was a request and a motion made at that board meeting on the 24th for a member or representative of PSI to be present at a board meeting to answer questions from board members. And so there was basically a report that had a lot of numbers on it and not a lot of clarity. And so I believe it was prudent at that point to request that that individual come and speak to the board about what they had done, what they had found. Okay? So that then brings us to May 4th, 2017, when the representative attended the workshop. I believe Mr. Harris was his name. And what he stated was that the limited fungal assessment at the facilities at Lowery Place was completed and indicated there was, first off, there was no visible mold that was determined, and it was a limited fungal assessment. So I think through the discussions of that board workshop, it was determined that he spot tested some places. I think there were a couple of rooms in that main building where there had been some employee complaints that were spot tested. I think they did some work in limited work in crawl space under the building that they maybe couldn't reach, but were able to put instruments in. And so I would describe it as a limited assessment of the building. I believe the cost was in the range of $3,600 to perform those tests at that time, based on, I'm going back and taking a look at the documents. He did indicate that there appeared to be fungal amplification within the facility. And so that's when I think at that time the board kind of got down into asking if the building was healthy, if it was unhealthy, if it was safe, it was unsafe, and we all kind of determined, and some of us probably knew ahead of time, that there's no standard for whether, based on spore counts or anything like that, whether a building is safe or unsafe. And what was stated, again, and I'm not the expert, what was stated at that meeting was it kind of depends on the individuals who work within that facility. If they're having problems, that then you address those problems. And so I'm just going back, and that's kind of where we ended up. So at that point, rightfully, the board still did not have a sense of the wellness of that building. So at that board workshop, PSI suggested that the district consider moisture mapping, which was a non-invasive way to determine if there might be some moisture in the walls or other spaces that might be more indicative of whether or not mold was there. I think you'll recall, board members who were here, that there was discussion about doing any deconstruction work, and in doing deconstruction work, buildings that are older than 1980, we have an asbestos abatement plan for the districts, and we identify where all of that is. And so in doing some deconstruction of that building, it's likely that some of that could be disturbed. And keep in mind, under federal guidelines, when a district has an asbestos plan and asbestos remains undisturbed, that it's best left undisturbed, and it's not a harm. It's when you start to move things around, deconstruct, and create particles that may then be released that you have to address those things. Okay, that was a conversation at the board meeting at that time. So then there was a board member request that the superintendent provide a cost estimate that included moisture mapping. So at this point, we're in May 2017. Nothing has been done besides this air quality test, and the employees have been relocated. Yes, ma'am.
What does tap testing mean? On the HVAC?
Process by which you sample the inside of the duct and see what the condition is.
Okay, thank you.
Tapping the duct line.
Okay, gotcha, thank you.
So then we're at the last board meeting in 2017 at which there's a reasonable amount of discussion and a motion that was made regarding the Lowery Place property. There was a report back by staff that said moisture mapping of outer walls at BAO would be just over $2,300, and just some discussion ensued, but additional testing was not conducted. So no moisture mapping was done on that facility. And then as we moved to the end of that board meeting, there was a motion approved requesting that the superintendent present a cost analysis of an estimate to renovate the central administrative complex in Niceville and an estimate to renovate the facility at Lowery Place, to consider the consolidation of most district employees to one facility. And in that motion, it included selected employees at Carver Hill. Board members agreed, there was some discussion, and at that time, due to the recent, what were described in that board meeting as budget cuts by the legislature, the timeline for doing that was yet to be determined. And so that takes us to the end of at least my review of discussion of the Lowery Place facility. And so that motion was there and was not ever addressed or followed through on. Okay.
And just a little more background information there. At that time, and board members, you'll recall that there was also discussion of a half-cent sales tax possibility. And so some of that budgetary discussion or actual withdrawal of that depended upon that too, because we were thinking that there might be additional revenue should the voters approve that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just given background for context.
Yes, sir.
In that, during that time period.
Okay.
And the secondary piece of context is that August the 5th of 2017 had not yet quite happened, based on that date.
Correct. So now it brings us to this spring. And at the April 8th board meeting, there was a motion that was approved to schedule this workshop for the discussion of the disposition of the Lowery Place facility and movement of all administrative functions to the Niceville Central Complex. So that brings us to where we are today. Now, as we kind of go back and look, I wanted to address certain things that I know would be of interest to you, and then I know that there are board member comments or requests for information, again, that we may be able to provide today or may need to provide at a later time. I wanted to make sure that the board members were aware that from that time in 2017, there had been no additional air quality analyses completed on the Lowery Place property, specifically that main building. I also wanted to report on indoor air quality issues in total at that Lowery complex, to include the ramps and the portable that insurance occupies, to make sure the board has an understanding of where the history is on that entire facility. So the main building has been closed. It has been heated and cooled over the last 2 years, but is not housing staff there. But the other ramps are still housing, as I mentioned in the previous slide. Other than the complaint that generated in 2017 that caused for the HR department to move from Lowery to OTC, there had been 2 other complaints of indoor air quality at that entire complex dating back to 2013. And so the public knows the process. If there's an employee that has a concern with an indoor air issue, we have an internal form that's numbered and identified that the employee fills out to identify what the issue is. It's signed by their supervisor. It gets submitted to our maintenance department or Mr. Bolton. Then they go out and do an assessment, and they look to do remediation. So, and that remediation could be anything from adding fans to the room or wiping down things, or if they determine that there's mold, then there would be a mold remediation process that we'd contract out and do. So just so the board knows that there were 2 dating back to 2013. One of them was inside the main building in that same general area, I believe, of room 26. And I think it did probably involve some HR staff at that time as well. And that was in 2014, I believe. And then earlier, there was an indoor air form filled out to air test one of the portables out in the parking lot that is no longer being used. So it's different from the insurance building. So those are the two that we received official inquiries on to take a look at. That's previous to 2017. So now I would think the board would also be interested in knowing between 2017 and now, because we do have employees that are still down there, have we received any indoor air questions, issues, complaints from folks existing? And we've had one since 2017, and that was due to an air conditioning duct backup. Sometimes in your home and you start to get a little water on your floors because that valve that lets the water go out clogs up. And so that occurred at the end of a week and was allowed to pool up over the weekend. And so by the time we got in Monday, or the employees did, they saw the issue. So that was handled and remediated as a single event with a single source. And so that's happened. That's the only one that we've identified that has been turned into us since this 2017 timeframe, if that makes sense. Now, in terms of specific plans developed or reviewed by the district in the last 2 years, specifically for Lowery Place, there have not been any specific. And when we use the word abatement, a lot of times the word asbestos comes along with it. So abatement could be mold abatement, it could be indoor air quality. So there has not been anything done with that facility since this time in 2017. Okay. We do, as I mentioned before, have an asbestos abatement plan that's credentialed, and so we follow that when it relates to asbestos. I want Dr. White to come up and provide us a few minutes just on indoor air quality program issue, because he does have some experience in this. And certainly, please feel free, and I know we're going to be getting to some other things that you'll have an interest in specific questions, but I'll let him speak to that now if you have a minute.
Well, just for a moment, I know the attorney will recall, and some of the board members might remember that about 20 years ago, at Blue Elementary, it was determined, believed that we had a sick building, and so we went through extensive work, abatement for mold, mildew, and the piece that was actually most helpful to me, to us, was the credentialed expert study that was performed by Dr. Spall out of the University of Florida. He was also a certified court expert witness. And that was very, very helpful. His report, his study, if you will, of the facility was extensive. And if I recall, it ran almost 70 pages with a lot of terms that I couldn't pronounce, nor did I know what they meant until I had to call on folks to help me explain it. So that was my experience with this. It was very chaotic, a little bit different than this. I know it was a lot of discomfort in shifting employees and moving employees, but we were actually a school where we had students in the building. Portables had to be brought in. We had to move kindergartners outside, first graders outside, and it was quite an ordeal. Okay, so that was my experience with
Yes,
that.
sir. Yes, sir.
As Dr. White said, I do remember sitting in front of that school with Dr. White talking about their report. We have taken indoor air quality very seriously for many years. In the early 90s, we had a school in the north end of the county where this came up as a huge issue. We were tasked to put a program together to deal with the problems that we had. At that point in time, we hired Dr. Will Spall as our industrial hygienist specialist in the area of indoor quality. He was internationally known. You couldn't get any better credentials. We also hired CH2M Hill, an engineering firm that had done extensive work for the Disney Corporation in the buildings that they were having trouble with, because we all live in a hot, humid climate, and the climate conditions were very similar to schools, their facilities. We developed a program. We went through that program. We worked with EPA. We adopted tools for schools. We developed a complaint form. But the biggest thing we did at that point in time, we went and we attacked the system-wide problems that we had, because we had some schools that had, like Dr. White said, that had system-wide problems, and we went at them one at a time and dealt with them and fixed them with the help of our consultants. Bringing that forward today, that program is still in place. We take it very seriously. We monitor both the room, the facility, the person having the problem. It comes from an MIS form that's filled out by a teacher, a parent, any individual that's using our facility. But the program in the late 90s received the most outstanding indoor air quality management program in the nation by EPA. We went to Washington and received the award. So we've been in this business a long, long time, and we've taken it seriously for a long, long time. The program is still in place over 30-something years, and Dr.
I
White
didn't
knows
know
it
that
really
part.
well. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's still in place today. That was something that was started, I want to say, 93, 94, somewhere around there. Any questions? Turn it back over to Steve.
So here's where we are now.
All right.
Okay, so we're moving to the point. This is what has been moved from Lowery Place to date. So you've got a list of 23 employees, which was 5 from the ESE department, 17 human resources, 1 custodial. The moves of those people to the central facility were able to occur at little or no cost. And I believe board members at that time were provided with the
Right.
cost of doing that.
Right.
Because, number one, you know, the board members were relocated here because it was a training facility that now serves dual purpose. You'll know that the technology lab that was next door, that was centralized to the district, we had actually already begun discussions or the thought process of relocating that in the north end where more of our IT people are, and moving to a lot of online professional development for folks. So that move freed up a space there that allowed for the location of, I think, 10 to 12 of these folks. And again, the rest of it was doubling up some people in office space and other things. And so that was done. And so that cost of doing that was did not involve the building of any new classrooms, the upgrading of electrical or HVAC, because everything was kind of in place at that point in time. Here is a total of what's in terms of employees that are still located at Lowery Place. So we've got the finance shop and all of payroll, accounts payable, purchasing, all of that. And I mentioned before, print shop, we've got 2 employees there, insurance, career technical ed, that's Ms. Branscombe and her office space there. ESE Records, custodial, then Okaloosa Public Schools Foundation, which is 2 employees and a part-time employee. So there's 43. So that kind of leads us to the request of this board workshop, and that is the disposition of Lowery Place and the relocation of employees to the central administrative complex. And I'm going to let Bill speak to some of this as well. So these would be potential action steps if the method of disposition turned out to be sale of the property. And I think that predicating all of this, obviously, that's not on this slide, is the proper recommendations and approvals by the school board to do or take any of this action. So I'm going to let Bill speak to kind of what's happened in the past whenever there's been an issue like this. It may not involve, it may just involve property. So it's just kind of informational for you, okay?
Basically, exploring your options, and your options have changed over the last few years. Actually, you have more options now than you had 15 or 20 years ago. But your options really for the property, or enter into an agreement with a local, another government entity, which is exactly what we did with Baker Water System a couple of years ago. We're allowed by statute to appropriately come up with a price, enter into a sales contract with them, and sell with another government agency. A new process that's been given us the last few years is to select an agency to list the property, just like you would list your house on the market. You would have to go through the process of selecting a firm to represent you, or how we have sold some in the past is by open bid. The downside to an open bid is once you issue that bid out there, you're only going to get prices for that window in time, and once you receive the bids, your two choices are to take one or reject them all. So you could be going through the process over and over depending on what you get when you open your bids. But that's basically.
Dr. Smith, can we go back to that previous slide on the appraisal? I see that that's complete.
Yeah, the appraisal is complete.
Yes, sir. I guess the question or consideration is that current appraisal is based on the current situation with that building.
As it sits 2 weeks ago.
Right. Okay.
And the property was appraised, but there was no deduct for the building. Many
Right.
times an appraiser will do a deduct for
Right.
the what is sitting on the property,
Right.
depending on best use.
Uh-huh. Okay. So I would just say board members might think about that as to the impact on that appraisal. I understand what you're saying. However, it's well known that main building has been empty for 2 years.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. I think that Steve's. Okay, I'm sorry. Sale process. To actually go through the process to sell the property, you're going to have to do three things. You're going to have to declare it surplus in your fish.
Does that include governmental agreement?
Uh,
Mr. McInnes, that might be
Governmental
something.
agreement, yes. Anytime we dispose it,
Regardless
regardless
of how we do it.
if we were to give it away,
Mhm.
to get it out of your fish report, you got to declare it surplus.
The only other exception to that the statute provides, the board has the authority to enter into lease purchase agreements with
Yes. Right.
someone for a facility, and the statute says in that regard, you don't have to declare surplus at the time the lease purchase is entered into.
All right.
Now, ultimately, there would be other disposals to be done, but that is another option out there.
Very good. That's helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Your second process is you'll have to have a survey recommendation in your school plant survey, which usually is a form of a spot survey, approving the sale of the property, which I don't see a problem in that at all if the board so chooses to do that. Spot surveys used to take months to do. Now they're electronic, and they usually take about a week, especially on raw, unoccupied property. And the last is a contract for sale. That's basically the three steps you've got to go through. Considerations on the property itself. The property is probably located in the most uncentral location in the county. It's as far south as you can get if you're using it for an administrative central complex of people that are serving the entire county.
Price just went up. It's beachfront.
Yeah, there you go, exactly. Well, about another quarter of a mile it would be.
Wish it were.
Next hurricane?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The condition of the building, as we've discussed today, potential high renovation costs. It's in an area of flat or declining enrollment. It's not a very good potential school site because of its size and its declining enrollment area.
Wait, how would that affect using it as an administration?
It wouldn't if you chose to choose it as a school site.
Oh, as a school, okay, yeah, gotcha.
And the potential of having a willing buyer from another government agency is an advantage. And that's basically the considerations of why you would want to dispose of it.
This may or may not be the right time to interject, but I see Mr. Beebe in the audience. Does that indicate that we do have another governmental entity that's interested?
We have had discussions with the city of Fort Walton Beach, and they are interested in talking to us about acquiring the property.
And I heard the term appraisal already done. Do we have that amount?
We
Do
do
we know?
have that amount.
Should we know? Okay.
And my understanding is that we have one appraisal and that we would do a second appraisal.
It would depend on, it really depends on what you want to do. Your risk of doing multiple appraisals is where they go up or go down, and your options are either one. If I were the city of Fort Walton Beach, I would have done my appraisal too, and that's most likely that they have, if they're interested, which they have expressed they are. It's a process of sitting down with them and negotiating it, and just exactly the way we did the Baker Water project.
Eventually.
Eventually, if you ever get there. Now, Jeff, did we do 2 appraisals at Baker? I think we did 2.
I don't recall, but I know the value there was much less than.
Yeah,
the
it was
value
a
here.
much smaller amount, and it gives you a lot more
Traditionally,
latitude.
There's been a DOE rule standard based upon the estimated value as to whether you did 1 or 2 appraisals. That rule, I don't think is even in place anymore, but we've still followed that standard. So here, clearly, I don't think anybody questions the property would be worth more than $100,000.
Oh, yes.
And that normally for 2 appraisals. But if you were working with another agency who had a separate independent appraisal done, then we might have the advantage of multiple appraisals already.
Basically, get enough to get everybody, all parties comfortable with a price.
Understand.
Okay?
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
So just forward thinking on this, the question may come, are there any potential initial savings that might be recognized from moving Lowery Place employees that still are there to a central complex? So setting aside all the costs that might be involved, are there any initial savings? And when we look at that, there would be a decrease in utilities at that facility. I've looked at the square footage of all the heated and cooled locations at Bay Area office. There's 1 meter out there, so it's kind of hard to parse out how much this particular ramp costs versus this particular ramp. But clearly, we have been keeping the air conditioning on in that main building this time period. So there would be a savings of that if it were if that property was no longer something we were working with. It could potentially be that there are a reduction in custodial needs. I know right now that the custodians at that location do the mowing of the lawns and take care of some of that outside grounds as well. So that's a possibility when you consolidate folks. There could be some additional savings. I always believe that there are efficiencies of scale when you bring people together, and there are efficiencies in work. But if I can't tie it to specific things and/or positions and Ms. Scallon, then I wouldn't relay to the board that there are X dollars of savings that will benefit because of increased efficiency. So that's a soft number that I wouldn't want to be a part of any consideration. So the cost involved in relocating employees to the central complex, and this is where I'm probably going to leave board members wanting for information. There have been requests for a cost analysis of relocating folks. What I will say is we have conversations with our construction management firm, Jacobs Titan, and the last conversation was about this central facility and where in this facility, if the board so choose to do something with the Lowery property, would be the best place to bring people at the least cost. And there's a side of that facility that is the cook chill facility, which has had HVAC and electrical upgrades done to it. So we would not know or be able to provide you with a cost of moving those folks, in my opinion, without spending some dollars to do that. And there may be some thoughts on that from board members that we can take direction on, the superintendent, but typically on something that involves this much, Jacobs Titan as our construction management firm would be involved. And as you know, board members, that would require generally a pre-GMP, which, as you know, costs money. And so we've not been, requested or recommended to do that at this point in time. And so that's kind of where we are today. And so I know that a lot of what you got is historical, but we're kind of back to where we were a couple of years ago. Not from the standpoint of we have employees kind of spread in different places, because I think they found a home here at the central facility, but in terms of that location.
You mean my simple math won't work in this case? I think we moved 23 employees for 25K, so we can't move 50 for 50K?
So I'm a math teacher by trade, Dr. White, and that's why I was trying to be very careful about talking about the facilities that existed here, that we shoehorned folks into at little
I get it.
little cost.
That's true.
I don't know that I can find, if the number's 43, that I can
understand.
find office space for 43.
Can I ask a question? Dr. Smith, would you step forward, please? Since you're the history expert on everything that's going on with the property within the school district, why was this building purchased?
This building was purchased from the Spence family, and I can't remember if it was specifically, it was a great building in the middle of the county. The Mid-Bay Bridge was just being built, and it looked like a great opportunity for the district to get here. Whether it was actually built to move here as a central complex, I can't remember. I don't remember that. I don't know.
Okay.
You'd have to go back and look at the board meetings and the motions that were made when the building was purchased.
I would hope that the folks that were in the positions that they were in when they purchased this, as being good stewards to our taxpayers, were purchasing this building with the intent of centralizing everybody. It's different within the county. I get it. We have a courthouse in Crestview, we have a courthouse in Fort Walton, we have an annex in Shalimar. There's a lot more business that goes on in there as far as dealing with the general public. With us, it's more about our employees and centralizing everybody. So, one, we can be a more efficient school district. Two, the people that are in leadership positions, they are all in one central complex. We're not having Rita at Fort Walton, Steve in Crestview. I think probably you're spending most of your time here now. So I don't understand. I want to know why, if we bought this building 20 plus years ago, now I think is our opportunity to do what was originally intended, because that's what I believe the intentions was to centralize everything. And I think we have a great opportunity to do that. Now, I know there's going to be other questions and other concerns, but just me looking in as a taxpayer and somebody who looks to try to figure out what's going to be in the best interest of the school district, I think centralizing everything is going to be, in the long term, is going to be the best thing to do. And utilizing this building that was purchased for that reason, I think we need to look at how we can best utilize it.
I have a comment and a question.
Yeah.
First of all, to Mr. Bryant, I can tell a little bit of that history. I don't know, obviously, why it was purchased, but I recall all of this major part of the building was surplus at one time. Just surplus, jam-packed, right, Mr. Bolton? Everywhere. And I remember being in the car with a previous superintendent driving past here, and we had scheduled professional development both in Crestview and at Fort Walton Beach. And I'd had people say to me, we're crossing each other on the road. So I said to that superintendent, this would be a great location centrally to have training. She called Mr. Walker, and then she called Mr. Nobles, who at the time was over facilities, and they got the ball rolling. So to their credit, we have this facility being functioning in ways other than just housing surplus equipment. But so that's a tidbit I know about that, just a tidbit in the realm of things. But secondly, a question, maybe for Mr. Horton or maybe for Mr. Chambers, could there be a consideration that as we look to putting more people here, I remember in times past, we potentially looked at putting specialists back out in the schools that they served. Like I remember we did that perhaps with technology specialists at one point in our history. I think I remember correctly, Ms. Lattmore can correct me if that's wrong. But so we have a number of specialists here that do exist to serve and support the schools in various ways. Could they not be relocated to schools and then still serve the district as a whole in their function? I understand their function is to support all schools and keep our academics at the level it is in the various departments. But could we consider that, which would serve two purposes, really? They'd be more intimate with the audiences that they serve and create space for which we might find places for HR and all of these other people that we're looking to move to get them closer to you. Just
So
a
if-
comment, just a
So, it's-
thought.
no, and I appreciate the thought, and of course, it's the first time hearing that thought, so, I like to be thoughtful
you do.
when hearing this and taking these considerations and making sure that we think about it and make smart and wise decisions. So I do appreciate that thought. Mr. Horton would probably have to look at space available at schools. As you know, many of our schools are at occupancy, but we do know that there is space in some. I do know the value of some of our specialists that are here and the coordination with those that supervise them. But I do appreciate the thought, and it's something that we might
I think
discuss.
schools would welcome them.
Well, I think
to
she's
have
just
them
asking,
there.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
you're just asking them to look at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Just a
appreciate it.
consideration.
All right.
I'd like to make a comment back to what Mr. Bryant said. As I recall, I was a classroom teacher at the time, but this facility was under another superintendent. The big goal was to make it a cook chill to change our lunch situation. Is that correct? That's what I remember.
Already owned it.
Yeah, when we got it. I don't ever remember, and like I said, I was a classroom teacher, so I may not have been privy to that information, that it was ever designed to actually make this the administrative building, because we actually had offices in the old Crestview Courthouse, because we used to alternate where school board meetings were. We'd go from Crestview, and the superintendent and some of his staff had offices up there. So we'd go back and forth. So I was just trying to, from my perspective, what that clarification was on that. But I have a couple of questions, Dr. Smith. Just kind of, in a way, going on the sentimental point, can you explain about, and I've done a little research, but I'd like you to explain about the historical registry for Lowery and its historical significance?
Yes, and I'll broaden that a little bit because of what Steve mentioned a while ago. I've looked through a couple of the old abstracts. I don't see anything on any deed restrictions stopping the district from selling the property. It was purchased from the Brooks family. There's no deed restriction on there that keep him selling. The topic of selling this property has been discussed a lot of times, even going back to the 50s, talking about selling it. But the historical aspect of it, the last time I researched it, which was 2 years ago, the Department of Historical Researches in Tallahassee basically has shifted a lot of that historical building authority back to the local jurisdiction. And since that building is in the CRA of the city of Fort Walton Beach, when they created that CRA, they had to do a certain amount of study and recognize those buildings, and the authority of what's to be done with those buildings is in their CRA.
Okay.
So that, can I tag on to her
Sure.
question? So that building does not present itself in any of our district's strategic plans for success? I know we have a facilities plan, strategic plan that's submitted every 5 or 10 years.
No.
So, okay.
But there's nothing to keep us from doing whatever we want to with it, other than a survey recommendation or a motion to surplus or those
So
two
there's no
things.
protected status.
There's no protective status to that parcel of land that I have found, but you will only really find it when you do a title search.
But it is listed on the Florida
They've been done
Historical
before.
Registry, right?
I'm not
don't
sure
think-
about that. Go ahead.
I don't know about that, I'm just saying, we've looked at the title before, there are no restrictions, as Bill said, from a deed standpoint or anything like that,
And is it the oldest structure that our school district holds?
Don't think so. Think Edge is.
Edges, okay.
Either Edge or South Side.
Okay.
All the buildings that were built by the WPA, were built in about a 5 or 6 year window, right after the Depression. The WPA camp, but actually was right across the street. And I think this school was built first and then blown down by a hurricane and rebuilt. And then they started building the other ones.
Okay. Another thing I'm going to say that may not be real popular, but when you're talking about air quality and that, I know that, and I know you said we have a program, and I think we're doing everything we can to make our buildings the best we can. But one of the biggest complaints I get, and I lived through, because I was 33 years in a school in this district, that the environment inside was not good. Teachers complain all the time. I went through asbestos removal as a teacher there. I went through roofs caving in from different things, mold looked at. I've known many colleagues who were ill. So what I'm seeing about and I know we've not done a full assessment, is not any worse at Lowery than it is in some of our schools. And I know I lived through it. I went through getting the rats out in the school I was in. We had to get out so they could knock them out. Through the weekend, you couldn't come up there. You had to stay away. I've lived through it. So that's my concern, is we're abandoning this, but I'm not hearing, and like I said, we haven't seen a full report, but at this time what I'm seeing is not any worse than what is happening in some of our schools. And that's just from my personal opinion, what I'm seeing, my
Right,
personal
and
experience.
I would just say that anyone might wish to consult Dr. Spall's report. I know we still have it somewhere, in which the certified court expert said basically what you're saying, Ms. Stanchek. It's Florida, and there's mold and mildew in Florida. Now, the question is how serious is it? Is it hazardous, et cetera, et cetera? So that's kind of what he said too. I would like to follow up on Mr. Bryant's question, though, about the purpose of this facility. I don't know that I could produce anything in writing, or that I could find anything in any old board minutes, but I recollect that there was an intent by a former superintendent to make this the central administrative complex. Mr. Bryant, that's in direct response to your question, okay? All right.
Good to know.
And that was what my hope is. that-
But I don't have it in writing.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and I
Good to
can,
verify.
I can verify there was an attempt because Jacob Titan people have a study from that time.
Very
However,
good, very good.
the price was so high
Right.
that particular superintendent decided it was
Back
not
off.
doable.
And some of the same issues we're facing now.
The exact same issues.
Yep, right.
And Dr. Smith, I'm a little confused by the CRA comment. I helped create the CRA in Destin. And as the best of my knowledge, the CRA doesn't control the disposition of other governmental buildings. If CRA declarations be damned. Can you explain that one to me?
From the historical concept of it. The study that I saw in Fort Walton Beach's CRA, the building is in their study.
And it says that they
The-
have some
the
say over
jurisdic-
the disposition?
The jurisdiction is in, basically not whether it's sold or not, it's what you do to it. Whether you renovate it, repair it, fix it, tear it down, or whatever.
Right.
Whether the historical significance falls with them. 30 years ago, it fell with the state.
Gotcha. Well, I've got just a few comments. I drew up 10 questions that I wanted to get information on, and the report has addressed some of them. Number one question was, any air quality reports that indicated danger of the employees? I don't see that we have one. It appears that we closed down our place based on the complaint of one employee. The wisdom of that I will not debate today, but it gives me pause for thought. Abatement plans that were reviewed by the district, it appears that we made a motion asking for them, but it never happened. Is that a fair analysis?
It's fair.
So I'm constantly amazed by the fact that this board votes, makes motions, and then things don't happen. An issue for another day. A complete list of the cost of moving the Human Resources Department and the other administrative functions. Rita, do you agree with that price that was given today? Is that from your analysis an accurate price, $26,000?
That is the price, that to move the existing staff, that they moved here and provide the cubicles and the electrical work
Okay.
And then including that, Mr. Destin, is, I think ESE, when they had moved up earlier in time, were over here, so they were moved over to toward the curriculum area as well. So there was some costs involved in doing that were included in that.
Another question I asked so that we were looking forward to what it is we could do, should we decide to do, is I asked, did we have any licensed electricians, civil or electrical engineers authorized or licensed to stamp or seal construction drawings or to do the work that we're doing up here at all?
And then the answer to that from my facilities folks is no, that we do not have that person on staff.
Okay. So that would be a real handicap to do any more of what we've just done, I would think, if it involves any kind of construction of any magnitude at all.
Yes, sir.
So we're going to have to go through probably Jacob Titan to do, if we decide to go forward with centralizing the administrative functions up here. And that leads to number 6, which is, did we have any analysis or remodeling cost estimates to bring the remainder of the functions up here? I've talked to Joel. I guess, Joel, if you want to come up and give us at least a general description of what it would entail for us to get those cost analysis.
Welcome, Mr. Linder. And Mr. Linder, for the public's benefit, would you tell us your position and those kinds of things?
Certainly. So we've obviously been around the district. I've heard a lot of the
Partners.
conversations and partners with you guys. So yes, 20 years ago, a previous superintendent did task us with drawing up plans to see about centralizing. I don't know if that was the initial. I don't know if that was the initial plan for the purchase of the building or not, but that was something that we looked at. Probably 1999 was when the drawings were dated. We did produce a price at that time to basically build out the area that we're sitting in right now as an administrative complex, centralizing all of the operations. And the price tag was at a point, I think, even though the district was in a different budget status at that point, there were still a lot of portables and a lot of classroom needs out in the district for the students, that the superintendent at that point made a decision not to spend money here. And so I don't think it wasn't that it wasn't viable, I think it was just there were other requirements. So we've looked at it since then, and we've talked about multiple different scenarios, and some of them have been mentioned already this morning about where you put the operations in this building. The building was renovated as a cook-chill facility in Program 1 probably 20-something years ago under a previous administration. It was utilized for a short time and is now still in the same status where it is. It's just not utilized as a cook-chill. But on that side of the building, we did upgrade all of the infrastructure, new plumbing, new mechanical, new electrical, as would be required, because this was an old Kmart building. It was really not appropriate for that operation. This side of the building has not, over the years, has not received those kinds of updates because all we've done is just put personnel in here. We haven't had to do much. We did do the server room back here, and at the time we did that, it required a whole new service, new generator, but that didn't have any plumbing requirements, but it had some pretty severe electrical. So we found that this side of the building is lacking in most of the basic components that would be required to construct it. So it would, other than the shell and the roof being in good shape, we pretty much have to start from scratch to build stuff here. And 20 years ago, it was $4 million, so I'm not a mathematician, but it's
Joel,
been a long time.
just to update me, because I haven't walked over there in a long time, I know that there's a training room over there, smaller than this, or there was, that could be divided. Is there other space on that food, cook, chill side that could be used?
Yeah, so the room, I think, I don't know if it was developed as a training room, but it's a large conference room, basically could be used for training. I think it probably has in the past.
Yeah.
There are offices at the front of the facility that are currently in use, and the rest of it is kind of an open kitchen, a lot of large blast chillers and freezers that were installed as part of the cook-chill operation, and there's a test kitchen where they could try out different foods at the time that is still there, and then dry storage. So it's a lot of open space, industrial, if you will, but it's still sitting in that same
But
condition.
those areas could be made into offices.
Certainly.
So, and just to follow up on what Mr. Linder's saying, there are definitely food service personnel over there, but there are also some facilities over there, some freezers and cold storage that need to remain. So it's not as though from front to back the entire building can be redone.
That wasn't my conception
Yes,
at
ma'am.
all.
Okay.
And real quick, the price tag is if we were to go across this whole building and do everything that was according to that draw, or the specs that I saw, I think they were from 1999, that would be the complete renovation. That's what we're talking about, total price, right? At that time was 4 million, you said?
It was, and I was from memory, I don't
Right.
have it in document, but I think it was 4 million.
Right.
At the time, 4.2 maybe, if it
Right.
rings a bell, but.
Do you remember, Mr. Linder, if that included moving MIS and DP operations here?
I do not recall. I'd have to look at the
I
drawings.
understand.
Yeah.
But that would be a significant cost
Yeah.
if it was included.
Yeah.
All right.
Mr. Linder,
ma'am.
has your group looked at the Lowery Place facility in terms of going in there and doing anything?
We've looked at it kind of just we scratched the surface of it. We called an asbestos contractor and walked through it, and we're somewhat familiar with the building. We've been here for 20-something years, so as we all have, we know there is some history with the building. But it is, we looked at it, we came up with what we thought would be remediation costs at the time, depending on what you want to address. There's multiple situations out there that have been found over the years, whether it's asbestos or mold or lead paint or other things.
So did you submit that assessment to
So it wasn't
the
a
district?
formal assessment, it
Oh,
was just a
okay.
conversation with
Just-
facilities where we, I wouldn't say as a favor, but as partnering with the district, we went out there and did some digging to try to ascertain what could be done, and just kind of, those were discussions.
Was that about the time that you assessed 20 years ago this, or has that been sooner?
No, that was probably 2 years ago.
Since it's been vacated?
Yes.
You went in there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But you didn't come up with any kind of figure of an amount at that time officially, just kind of looking around?
I recall that we talked with Mr. Bolton about some loose figures, but depending on what would be done and how many buildings would be abated, because at the time there was talk about just focusing on the main building and leaving the ramps alone and some of the other satellite buildings. And, I mean, there's different conditions that need to be addressed, and all of the different buildings have different situations, but there wasn't any formal budget provided.
But ultimately, your group could do a comparison of what it would take to renovate here versus renovating Lowery, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
And of course, the question would be, what are we renovating the asbestos, as long as we don't disturb it?
Mhm.
We don't have to abate that
That's
at
right.
the time, according to our plans. The air quality was the one that we abandoned on, and I don't know that we've looked at that, but to try to bring us back to where we need to be. At the time, the
Thank you, Mr.
functions
Moore.
we've moved up here, I don't really advocate trying to move them back. The question is the 45 that we have down there right now, and I don't see where we have the financial wherewithal at the moment to dislocate and bring them up here, unless we can find a really giant pot of money somewhere. So the question is, what actions are we going to take? And, in talking to Mr. Horton and various folks, I'm afraid we're not at a point where we can take actions right now. We don't have any facts to make, to base our actions on
Has-
until we.
Well,
get
but
a-
what we're doing here is not ideal. If you've walked into HR over there,
It's not.
it's cubicle city, and it's, it has some,
So have we
Some
looked
drawbacks.
at OTC for any space? The space that HR used to be in there, could any of our people be put there while we're in transition, so to speak? I know that I went down there a couple of times for my own personal business while they were there, and that
Yes,
looked
ma'am.
pretty good.
And so I don't believe there's space in OTC to relocate all of finance in any temporary fashion. And I wouldn't advocate splitting up that department unless some specific decisions were made about what to do. So to me, it's kind of it's either a, well,
All or none.
it was
And I'd like to say,
things like that, because
so this discussion here, so this is probably one of several items or topics that gives me a little bit of sleepless nights right now. So just going back, just first of all, just looking back in 2017, the school board asked for some certain tests to be done to equip you with the knowledge that you needed to make some decisions. And some of those tests, they were not done. So to truly know the status of the Lowery building based on the one PSI test that we have, where there's limited I think it's fungal growth. So that concerns me that we do not have a full, comprehensive, I'm going to use the word test because I'm not an expert in this area, a full comprehensive test. The other thing that runs through my mind when we're talking about district facilities, I do think about finance, I do think about payroll, I do think about the foundation, the ESE records that are over there. I think we would all agree that having everyone in one space, you're more efficient, the communication can be better, and you can do things that you can't do when you're separated. Then comes the sleepless night piece. So where we are right now in our school district, as we know, student safety, for example, we're going through a process right now where we've talked about the hardening of schools, and we've talked about right now there's a phased system to do that, and to do that over a course of time. So that's one piece. We have portables that are out there at the schools. That's another piece. We're in the process of a phased-in system right now of putting canopies, the portables, for our ESE students. I think each of you know very well, right now, every single day, whether it's an air conditioning, whether it's a window, things happen right now in our schools each and every day. I do believe that there is a time where we need to bring this district together in one central facility. That's just my opinion in time, but I also believe it needs to be at the right time for the school district. When you look at the capital needs that we have, the safety needs that we have, for me personally, it might be difficult right now where we currently are to spend money on district buildings where there's many needs that we have at the schools.
And I will just tag on to that if you don't mind. That was actually my next comment. For me, at this juncture in our district's history, it's all about financial considerations, because in my mind right now, pending other information that Mr. Horton and his staff might bring forward, the sale of this facility at Lowery Place could bring in funding for two of our most critical needs, I believe, which are, as you said, security. We don't have the funding, I understand, to do all the security needs at our buildings right now, and updating our aging infrastructure. We have huge needs there. And I know that even, let's just wildly say, and I don't know an appraisal, but let's just say we got $2 million for our building. I know that couldn't do everything. We are never going to get, and probably in my lifetime, enough to do everything. But we could do a lot with that, a lot more than we can do today. And maybe set aside some of that for renovating here and bringing our people over. Whatever the strategic plan your staff came up with, that could go a long way, I think.
I would respectfully point out the one problem with that. If we do sell the property, then we have to relocate those 45 employees.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
The cost of that may well offset the value that we get from the building. And then there's always the security upgrades that we're trying to work on, $2 million. And I've been working pretty closely with the group that's looking at that. Would cover maybe one-third. One-third is not enough. So selling the property right away, could we use the money, some of it? We could, without a fact-based decision on how much it's going to cost to move those 45 employees. We don't know that it will have any money available.
But this board has already requested an analysis to do
Right.
that.
So
and we don't have that.
We need that.
But
And I would
So
agree,
to-
and I think the solution probably for today is that we agree to let Superintendent Chambers get those numbers for us and make recommendations. I agree with almost everything he said, even the benefit of having a central complex.
Absolutely.
But the problem is, we have other fish to fry at the moment, and I couldn't support letting those other fish die from a lack of breathing while we did that. So, I'd be satisfied to let him come forward with a recommendation and try to figure out what it would cost us to move those employees,
So did I hear the figure 26,000 to your answer to your question number 4 there, when you were talking earlier?
The 26,000 is for us to
To move.
shoehorn them end up here, I think.
And it's not the
Yeah.
best situation.
And we did that with benefit, you know.
Correct, and
We
so.
really can't be doing construction on that magnitude, absent qualified personnel to do it without getting ourselves in trouble eventually. Not only would we not want to violate building codes, but we don't want to put employees in facilities that have not been constructed by licensed individuals. We need
Exactly.
to not do that. So
Right.
I'm afraid the 26,000 is not a realistic cost on what it'll cost to move those 43 employees.
So are we going to wait, though, till we have the money to make the big shift, which probably won't happen? I mean, we're already seeing we don't have money, or we're going to take smaller steps? Are there things we can do to move in segments that would help, or are we going to, because the way I see it, I don't see any money coming that we're going to be able to throw the switch and let's do it. So, and I don't know enough about construction and so forth. Are we going to be able to make some moves? I know what you're saying is we can't just move them without, of course, the safety and having people with the correct credentials and everything doing that. We can't just throw people in there and hope for the best. I mean, already we know some things that in this location are not ideal. So that would be my question is maybe we need to see if we can do
So
partially.
let me say what I think I've heard, and I concur with what both of you are saying. I think what I've heard is that we're going to do those things that we previously asked to be done that haven't yet been done. And that would be the cost estimates. And I think there was also a request for an additional study, if I remember correctly.
And I just want to clarify with previously asked. I think previously asked was back in the 2017 timeframe. So just in preparing for this meeting, wanted to make sure that for this presentation that we went back and truly knew what happened in 2017,
Right.
truly knew what the board had asked, where we were on all of that. So that's part of this this presentation. And currently, anytime that you all ask for something, we want to be certain that we give you what you do ask for and give you all the necessary information to be able to make the best decisions. And I do want to say, as it pertains to the current facility in the 26,000, for example, so we had in essence an open space, even though it was occupied with computers, but we had a space. There's one more, to my knowledge, there's one more space that's left in this facility that's enclosed, but you could probably get about 6 people or so or less in that space. And then the decision would have to be, do you do cubicles again? Or do you actually go through the process of doing it the right way and putting walls, so to speak? And there's nothing wrong with the cubicles, but I think ideally if you're talking about getting everyone in one spot, I think we'd all like to do it in the best way possible for our employees. But right now, there's one additional spot, so to speak, where you could move some employees.
And so will you be bringing that recommendation to us? Is that what I hear? And trying to answer Ms. Ivanchek's question and Mr. Destin's question?
So to be quite honest,
Because there may be funds involved.
So there would be funds involved in that, and I just go back to right now, and I don't want to not answer the question. Right now, my main focus is what we're doing on the safety side. It is how are we going to equip the schools with what they need to be as safe as possible. The other piece, the portables, and the other things that I've talked about. I think every dollar that we can spend right now for the safety of the kids, I think is critical. And the thing that I absolutely appreciate about the board is the fact that you care about these employees so deeply, as do I. Once again, I believe that there's a point in time where we need to get all folks to this facility, but where we're having to do things over time at schools for safety, I just think that every dollar needs to go there when we're talking about capital dollars.
All right, so what I'm hearing then is that you may or may not be bringing forth recommendations concerning disposal of the facility. and that's certainly okay. I mean, that's within his prerogative, in trying to manage all the different things that we have to deal with in the school district, particularly in light of those safety issues, okay? All right, so does that kind of help? I mean, we are where we are. I guess for me, the only good news in this scenario is that we're still using that facility. We still have employees there who are working every day to accomplish the good things in this school district. And it's not like the place is empty. I mean, we've got employees there that are working every day.
But no one in the main building.
That's right.
No one in the
That's
main
right.
building.
That's right.
Okay.
So,
Okay, so Mr. Destin, go
no,
ahead, sir.
so to try to get my head around what, you're gonna bring recommendation back to us on, and I completely concur with your analysis on where capital money needs to go in the short term. We need to address that school security. But, and looking out farther, you'll bring back some recommendations. And of course, this is a workshop, so we can't make motions, but, you know, I would like to ask Jacob Titan to give us a GMP, once you have come up with a recommendation on what it will cost to move people here, so we at least will know what we're dealing with from a financial point.
But first,
So-
we need
so-
those studies that have been asked before. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that,
So-
to
That's
me,
what
is
I
the
think.
first, yeah.
Going back to the motion, just so that I'm clear,
Right.
so we can get our work
Right.
aligned. The last motion, and they were similar, asked for a cost analysis of an estimate to renovate the central administration complex in Niceville and an estimate to renovate the facility at Lowery Place. So a cost estimate, when I hear that and I hear the board's concern and consideration for making sure that in terms of the renovation here, that it's done properly so that employees have the right resources, electrical, HVAC, that to me tells me that we would be needing to bring a pre-GMP to the board, which, as you know, has a cost to it. And so at that point in time, you would not see specifically the actual GMP for these projects, but you would see a pre-GMP dollar amount that at that point in time, if the superintendent chose to bring that as a recommendation, that there be some funds expended at that point.
Well, Mr. Horton, and just from my way of looking at it, I guess I'd like to know, is it worth spending the money on Lowery Place to begin with? And the only way I know to get at that is with the study, a study much like Dr. Spall conducted for me at Plough Elementary. I mean, I don't know how we would determine.
Yeah, the air quality is what we need to find out about, and I would think that would be a first step. But a pre-GMP, we can't get until Mr. Chambers has made his recommendation on what he's recommended we do.
And remember, there is a cost
Uh-huh.
to the pre-GMP, so
There
Well,
is.
and there's going to be a cost for that study.
you incur that if you want to.
And so, in my opinion, now you purchasing department will need to figure out the best way to approach that, assuming that's the direction that we head. Whether that's going to be an RFQ, RFP, it may even be sole source. But I assure you that Dr.
It won't be
Spall
cheap.
was paid for producing the study.
Oh, yeah.
And I would imagine that's something that would have to come back to us as well before you can even initiate that.
I don't see how you could do a cost analysis without doing the study on the, I mean, if you're going in there to renovate it, that would have to be a consideration. So I don't see how you could get to the cost analysis to renovate it without looking at that, because it's had to have an effect. So I think that's square one. Dr. White, you're right, is that study, I think.
Yeah, and you're right, if we're talking about Lowery Place, there was no renovation
I don't think that's the
suggested.
plan.
The air quality issue was what we were trying to get at, and that
Right.
is an abatement rather than renovation, once we find out if there is any problem at all.
Right. That's it.
Well, we can't make any motions here.
Nope.
Correct.
But Mr. Chambers.
But with the fact that this is a workshop and we're having this discussion, which I appreciate, which I think is good, I just want to be certain that we're all on the same
Yep, yep,
same page.
understand.
So in terms of Lowery Place, are we of the mind to, and forgive my lack of technical knowledge of this, but are we of the mind to do a study, an air quality study, and you can figure out what the correct terminology of that is, and do that professionally?
think that was the motion, if I remember.
That
from-
motion was made
Yeah,
in
that's already been
2017.
done. I mean, been a motion, but it just didn't follow through.
Never happened. So, that is a central question to the actions we've taken that has to be answered.
Exactly. I don't
Dr.
see how we
Kelly?
move forward without that.
I guess in my mind, I'm looking at, are we going through all of these motions and cost factions if we are actually looking at disposal of the building, getting it off our fish, sale, or whatever? That seems like a lot of money. Or do we need to do it for our own benefit? I'm trying to weigh in my own head, why?
I'm with you.
Why spend the dollars if that's not a direction we're going? I think I hear that no one wants to put our people back there. And certainly I concur. I certainly love the idea of everyone being centralized. But that seems like a lot of money.
Well, and what I can do is I can get with our people and we can look to see what the actual cost would be to do this the right way. Bring that cost back to the board. We can have a discussion about that, and then look to see what direction that we go from there.
I would point out that while I don't advocate moving anybody back, we moved out of a perfectly good school board facility without a single complaint about air quality
Yep.
from any of us to work
Yep.
there. If there is no problem with the air, why would we spend more money
That's what I'm
to
saying.
have a
Exactly.
facility constructed here for our board meetings? Because we're meeting in the training room.
Mhm.
If there's no problem there,
Yep.
I don't have a problem with having meetings there. That at least will take away the cost of having to do something more permanent for a board meeting room.
And potentially even relocation of folks
Right.
back there,
Yeah, I
if
wouldn't-
the place is safe.
That's right. I wouldn't advocate taking the employees because they're working up here, and to move them around twice in
Right.
2 years is not something I would
No,
want
I
to subject
concur,
them to.
but there may be ancillary staff that may wish to go back there, for example, the folks that work with the school board.
That's exactly right.
But we don't even know if it's safe to go back yet.
Correct.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that you're going to try to come back with some kind of estimate of what such a study would cost. And then at that juncture, the board may wish to change their mind and not move forward, or to go ahead and move forward. Is that what you,
That's
okay?
exactly
Okay.
what I would think,
All right.
that we can get done, hopefully. And in fact, we've already made a motion to get done. 2
Well, I
years
know,
ago.
but we understand, and of course, I think one thing I would just say is that regarding that is in some respects, I feel like that during that time frame, we were overcome by events.
And we were.
And so with that contextual knowledge, I think that in part explains some of what happened or didn't happen. Okay? All right, Mr. Bryant?
Yeah, I just want to say, just real quick, I mean, here we are once again, and I respect everybody's comments here, and this is why I love our board. I think we work great together, but I do have to ask the question again, and I know we're putting safety and everything else in there, and I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm all about safety. But we're on a double-edged sword here, okay? So we have a building that I can assure you that when it comes back, our long-term plans for this building will be non-existent, because I just don't see the long-term benefit of holding on to this building. I also see that Fort Walton Beach is sitting out there, and I also know that there's a lot of plans for that area down there, which I don't think would include us being down there. I think the cost of with us selling the building and turning around and showing the taxpayers that, okay, there's going to be some cost in doing what we have to do, but it's going to be a long-term investment. And I think people will see that and say, okay, well, I can see you putting the money into that and the benefit for the long term. And that's how we have to look at the long term, because we talk about it all the time. We have schools that are falling apart. We have all these things that are falling apart, and all the time we put Band-Aids on them. And I think in this particular situation, the opportunity is there for us to do something that in the long term I think is going to be a wise investment in doing what we want to do, and that's centralize our people Also, looking at it from a long-term point of view, that property down there, even though we've had it since 1935, it really has lost all its practicality for what we are doing in the 21st century. So I get it's a historical value. I mean, I get all that. And whoever buys it, they can do whatever they want with it if they want to keep the building there and all that. But I personally think in the long run, we're still just throwing money into there when we can, we have opportunity to consolidate it. And I know it's going to come back at your recommendation. And my thing moving forward is that, it's a difficult situation. I get that you have many sleepless nights. I'm glad I'm not in your position, but I know this is one that we kind of have to look at as a long-term investment. And if we're going to centralize everybody, that's a long-term investment. So that's just my 1 cent on it. So
Thank you, Mr. Bryan.
That's kind of in alignment with where I was going earlier, that, why are we continuing to unravel that ball if our plans are on this path? We need to stay on one central path and not keep ping-ponging around, I believe.
All right. Anything else? Mr. Destin, I'm going to defer over to you because, as I remember, you were the one that asked for this workshop.
I think we've had a good, healthy discussion.
All right.
And I appreciate Mr. Bryan's opinion, but we've got a priority list, as Superintendent Chambers has said, and very, very limited funds. So there are some things that are more important than a central complex. And school security would be one of them.
All right, colleagues. Anything else on this topic? I'm sure Mr. Horton is tired standing up there. Unless you have something else, Mr. Horton, I'm
No,
going to...
thank you, sir. No, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Superintendent,
Horton.
you're good with everything here?
I am, but I do want to thank Mr. Horton, Dr. Smith, Mr. Bolton. I know a lot of work has gone into this presentation and digging back, and the fact
Yes.
that Dr. Smith digging back to 1934, I think that's pretty remarkable. So I just very much appreciate that.
Yes, and I want to thank them too. Since I took part in initiating this, they have done a lot of work.
Yep.
And they already have days that are full to the top, so I appreciate it.
And we got some good information.
Real good.
Okay. All right, so, colleagues, it's time then, I guess, to move on to the other item on the business here, and that is 2.2, Legislative Funding Update, presented by Mrs. Rita Scallon, Chief Financial Officer. So, Superintendent.
Yes, sir. So I do want to set the stage just a little bit, so if you'd bear with me, I'm just going to make a few comments as it pertains to the budget, and then we're going to have Rita's going to come up and just share some information. But I do want to say, so as you know, the legislature, they've finalized the education budget for the 2019-2020 school year. And as we've examined the current state budget and what that means for Okaloosa County, I wanted to take this time to update the board on our current financial situation. We can't expect Tallahassee to solve all of our problems, as it pertains to our budget here in Okaloosa County. I do believe that we need to own our current financial situation and take purposeful actions to solve our own constraints as it pertains to the budget. I think we need to make strategic decisions that are in the best interest of our students and our employees, and keep any reductions, as we've talked about at previous board meetings, as far away from the classrooms and students as possible. And I agree with that. I'm very grateful for the $234 per pupil increase in school spending for Okaloosa County, which is the largest increase since 2013-2014, and the $74 per student increase to the BSA, which is the largest increase since 2015-16. And I'm very grateful to our local delegation, because we know that they've fought extremely hard to bring every dollar possible to Okaloosa County. And the fact that Okaloosa is receiving an increase of $234 per pupil and an increase of $74 in the BSA compared to last year is something that I know that we all appreciate, because imagine if we didn't get that increase. Governor DeSantis is to be commended for the increase to public education funding, and I'm encouraged by the actions that the governor has taken as he's truly made public education a priority. And I'd also like to thank the Commissioner Corcoran, Senate President Galvano, House Speaker Oliva, Senate Budget Chair Bradley, and the Education Subcommittee Chair Senator Stargel and Representative Latvala for the work they've done with the education budget. For Okaloosa, the increase in funding generates approximately $9.7 million as an increase from last year's budget, which Rita will outline here momentarily. That increase in funding obviously is very much appreciated and needed for Okaloosa County, because imagine if we didn't get that. Now the question is, what does that increase in funding mean for Okaloosa County? And it means we need to look at how we're spending our dollars that are allocated from Tallahassee, and I believe that we need to be better stewards of the taxpayer dollars when budgeting decisions are made by those closest to the schools and those closest to the students. How dollars were spent in the previous administration will need to be examined as we go into the final budget for the 2019-2020 school year. And we're going to do some things a little bit differently. I've mentioned that I believe that we need to make adjustments to the district office and with district-run programs. So I'll be looking to make cuts at the district office and the district level first. We cannot ask the people that are closest in the schools to tighten their belt if we're not willing to do the same thing here at the district level. That is why to date, as we've discussed, I'll be bringing to you a reduction in district costs at approximately $1.1 million. And until the final budget is presented to this board, we'll continue to go through the district budget with a fine-tooth comb to see where additional cuts can be made, while at the same time being able to operate the district efficiently and effectively. And I know very well that cost cutting is difficult, and nobody likes that. It's challenging. But I also know that we must start at the district level and keep the cuts as far away from the schools and the students as possible, as we've stated. Starting this summer, I'm going to convene a group of principals to help me and our staff transition back closer to a site-based model where decisions are made at the school level. And this, once again, I think that we need to do business differently as we move into the 2019-2020 school year and beyond, and having a lean but competent district staff, I think, will help us move back towards a site-based model where, once again, decisions can be made at the school level. But I am very appreciative of the work of Governor DeSantis and the legislature with this increased funding. But I will say, with that, once again, even based on decisions that we've made in the past, we have to look at how those dollars are best spent. And that's exactly what we're going to do as we move towards July, where we will deliver you a balanced budget. Ms. Gallen?
All right, Ms. Scallon, so you have the distinct responsibility of explaining why, if we got a $9.7 million increase, we're going to have to make cuts.
Would it be appropriate for me to ask the superintendent a question?
Sure, yeah, go ahead. Question by Mr. Bryant, Superintendent.
So quickly, you mentioned about, Mr. Chambers, you mentioned about going back to a site-based way of doing business. Is it fair to say we're going to go back to the original site-based, or are we going to kind of look at it as a hybrid, as I've heard you say in the past? So like I'll have to stick up for a couple of my schools, like Laurel Hill School, these schools that have benefited from centralized. I just don't want to see those schools that don't have the population necessarily be restricted because of that.
So I agree wholeheartedly. I think Laurel Hill, if you look back in the past, Baker's, you look back in the past, I think based on the model, I think sometimes it may have been difficult for those schools to do the things and be on an equal playing field with other schools. And I think that's something that we definitely have to look at. Would not want to go back to a model where Laurel Hill, Baker, or some of the smaller schools are not able to do things, based on their enrollment. And I think that's why it's important to get our principals involved in the process with staff and take time to really look at, over the course of this 2019-20 school year, look at what will it take to get to and I'll use the word hybrid, a hybrid site-based model where, once again, where some of those decisions, and a lot of those decisions, can be made at the school level.
And I'll also have to comment too, and I appreciate what you're saying about involving your leaders on the ground that are fighting the fight every day. And I think you're going to probably get a lot more out of them, just hearing from them what they can do to manage in their particular school, to help save money. And, we use the word cut just for the general public. I know cut is like, and I like to use the word that we're managing the money that we have. And if it means kind of reductions, that's going to happen. But, we're managing the best we can. And I think if you're involving the leaders on the ground, I think you're going to get a lot more in return. Your savings are going to be a lot more than if you didn't involve them in there. So.
Absolutely, I agree.
And I just follow up, Mr. Bryan, I think the new model, whether you call it hybrid or whatever the case might be, is somewhat compelled by what the state has done with controlled open enrollment. I mean, that really changed the model of funding for schools based upon what it used to be under the old site-based scenario. So by definition, it's going to have to be a little bit different.
And I think even when we were under the old site-based, we still subsidized some of the schools that
that's
didn't have the
right.
population necessary.
That's right.
I mean, you can't get around that. We can't let the schools go lacking, so.
Because they
even
can't have
back then,
programs
They figured it out.
for their kids, right?
And just briefly, I know I don't want to hold you up, but one thing I'm going to point out, there have been a lot of new administrators appointed even since January, and there's more to come. Many of those administrators have not worked under site-based. Just to make a quick statement, I'm assuming you have some training and all that prepared because they've not maybe even been a teacher or worked at all under that model, and that success I think will come from the training that those leaders have.
No,
Well, she's
absolutely.
standing right there. She trained us.
Right, that's what I'm saying, but it's been a while since we've had that model.
No,
And a
absolutely.
lot of new leaders out there.
That's right.
And more to
You're
come
right.
as we
You're
see in our,
right.
and I just want to make sure that, well, one, we don't want to set those individuals up to fail.
No.
We want to make sure that's, their success is our success. And so I'm sure that that's what you were talking about, having the training this summer.
So the training, no. So I'm talking about getting a group of principals together to look at a site-based model.
Okay.
And them being a part of the process and what that looks like. Going back to the training piece, we do have, probably the best chief financial officer in the state of Florida.
No,
And I think that is
yeah.
something that is a blessing for us. You look over to the table, you have principals here at the district staff also, as well as many of you up at the board that are very familiar with the site-based model. But I agree, the vast majority of our principals have not
That's right.
been there, and we would never put them in a situation where, here you go, and
Here you
now,
go. Figure it out.
survive.
No.
As some of you may recall, I know Dr. Kelly, Dr. White, you remember even back when we were in the site-based model, finance would do a great job, whether it was FTE projections or whether it was the budget, where principals could come in groups or even one-on-one to make sure that you fully understood your budget, you were fully doing what you needed to do in terms of where you place money, your positions, your teachers. So we have a fantastic finance department that I think would be able to help us transition back to what that model will eventually look like.
And what you said, with those principals participating in those projections, that may already be occurring, I just don't know, but that would be good. I think that would be helpful in light of some recent experience, perhaps.
That's true. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Callen.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning. Your turn.
I'm going to give you an update of the results of the legislative budget agreement. It'll be summary in nature, but I hope this will help y'all see where we're at. Okay, I passed out a packet to you, and it's basically got three reports. The long sheet, the 11 by 17
Yes, ma'am.
sheet.
That's the first one, I think, in the,
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's the first one, and it's probably the one that I'm going to spend the least time because I have
Okay.
a
right.
different version that I think will be more helpful to you. But anyway, this long document is a line by line of FTE projections, BSA, DCD compared to the fourth calculation, which is where we're at currently in the current year, to what the final conference report is. And so it goes through line by line, and then the document that I gave you that's called the final conference report that is stapled here, 57 pages, and each page is highlighted for Okaloosa, so that will help you if you want to go back and tie your numbers
Okay.
back to this impact of funding changes. You'll note on this sheet that there are some lines that are highlighted in yellow. Okay, the lines that are highlighted in yellow are what comprise your what I call your operational flexibility dollars, okay?
All right.
And so as you see, they're all labeled D, highlighted yellow, and that ties to line 54, which is a net increase of 6.3 in operational flexibility, okay? And so let me stop there because I'm remiss in starting off because I know we have new members. But as you know, during the legislative session, what happens is the governor presents a budget, the House of Representatives presents a budget, and the Senate presents a budget. And then through discussion and negotiation, they finally come to a consensus on what the budget will be, and that is what's labeled the final conference report for the year. So that's what I'm discussing. That's what I started off discussing to you. But this document is the consensus of the legislative session related to education budget. And then this document will help you tie those numbers together, okay? All right, so what I'm going to focus on is the small sheet of paper, okay? And so what you'll see is, on the long sheet that I gave you, if you look at line 53, okay, that's $9.7 million, which refers back to the amount that the superintendent referred to previously. Okay, so that is all FEFP funds. That is operational flexibility. That's categorical funds. That's everything that is labeled total FEFP. Okay, so if you move to the second section on this sheet, I'm just telling you that those tie together. So I'm taking that number. I'm starting off on the analysis page. Okay, the next section that starts with line 17. Okay, we had started with the 9.7. So you'll see line 17 is the best and brightest. That comprises $3.1 million of the 9.7. And that is what used to be outside of the FEFP, and this year it was incorporated into the FEFP. Now that is money that comes from the state directly for teachers and principals, depending on whether they qualify and meet all of the criteria. So that basically is what I'm calling that section is flow through. That comes from the state, goes out to whichever employees are eligible and qualify. Okay, so the district does not receive any of that money for operational purposes or even for categoricals. Okay, then line 22 you see is the Florida Teacher Lead, and everybody's familiar with those funds. Those are funds that are supposed to try to offset amounts of money that teachers spend out of their pocket for supplies and other things for the classroom. So those two are your direct flow-throughs, and those comprise $3.1 million, which then brings your potential FEFP funds, excluding flow-throughs, to $6.6 million. Okay? So then the next section is what I've labeled as restricted, FEFP restricted funds. And when I say restricted, it's because they're categoricals. Those dollars are allocated for a specific purpose. So for example, if you have the mental health allocation, that money can only be used for mental health. Safe schools, that money can only be used for safe school purposes. instructional materials that can only be used to purchase textbooks and consumables, just like SAI, supplemental academic instruction. That money can only be used for remedial type services. And then you get into specific things like the DJJ supplemental allocation that can only be used for DJJ purposes. And of course, transportation can only be used for transportation. And as y'all all know, and I've said many times, you know, that we have to supplement that. So once you look at all the increases and decreases for your categorical restricted funds, that's an increase of $331,793. Okay? So that now brings your total potential FEFP funds, excluding your categoricals and excluding your flow-throughs, to $6.3 million, which that's the yellow line that ties back to your first page, okay? So, potential operational flexibility, $6.3 million. But before we get to the amount that we have available for operational purposes, we have to set aside $1.7 million. And the reason I say set aside, because that we have projections, and we as a district project for our schools what our FTE will be. The state offers models for FTE. Okay, and there, you're never going to be able to project exactly what the state will take as our FTE projection. It's models. We have to pick the model that we feel is closest to our projection, and then there's other variables involved in it as far as programs and weightings and caps and those kinds of things. So anyway, with that being said, the closest model to what we had in projections was 417 FTEs, and I have that in parentheses there if you see that next to the last line on that sheet. Less FEFP based funding, weighted FTE not projected, 416.77. That means that I know right now, based on my projections, that I am not projecting that amount, that number in my projection. So therefore, that revenue is included in my revenue, the 9.7 in total. That's in there, but I've got to put that money back because it's not earned, and unless I earn it, I don't get it. And I just want to make sure too that I make a distinction between anticipated and unanticipated FTE, because lots of times people will think, well, this is our FTE reserve. I know right now that I'm not projecting that. That's included in my revenue, so I've got to pull that out. But I also have to have an FTE reserve for an unanticipated differences in FTE, just like we had one this year. And if I had not had that money set aside, then we would have had to take, implement some things to be able to reduce that amount of money. So there's an anticipated and unanticipated.
Can I ask a question about the FTE reserve? Okay, so we have a reserve count in case we do have some, that's where you pull from, right? Okay, is there an amount that has to stay? Is there any legal thing on that, or just we do what we can?
No, there's not a legal
amount
that has to be for FTE. Now there is in statute that you have to have a 3% unrestricted fund balance, but that's separate and aside from the FTE reserve. FTE reserves for unanticipated events is something that you build over time, and as much as you can put in there, the more the better.
And are we healthy right now? We're still healthy even though we had to dip in there?
We have money in our FTE reserves, and if you ask a finance person, they're always going to tell you that that the more you can have in there, the better. Okay.
So you do that when you see some money, but that, I guess I'm wondering, where does that reserve money come From.
Okay, as you go through the years, at the end of the year, when you reconcile your revenues, your estimated revenues to your actual revenues, you may have, some years, you may have a little bit extra, and that's where you try to pigeonhole back that money for FTE reserves.
But once you put it in that reserve, the money, that's all it can be spent on,
That's
right?
correct, because it is a line item in the budget that says FTE reserve. I cannot use that money for anything else unless I come to the board and ask for approval to use those funds, just like this year when we brought that forward to you. I brought it forward to you and told you where I was going to get that money from to cover the decline in FTE. So that takes school board approval.
Okay, all right,
So
thank
that
you.
fund rolls forward if we don't spend it?
That's correct. That's correct, yep. It's never touched unless school board approval, and I bring to you what we need to use those funds for.
And so we dipped into that this year, because you brought it
Yes,
to us.
ma'am.
So
Yes,
you're
ma'am.
working on, from this, trying to get that back to where it was?
I will over the years, I will try to replenish that fund. Now again, this 1.7 has nothing to do with that fund.
Okay,
Okay, because, and I know it's probably confusing, but what happens is, let's just say that we as a district projected, simple, 1,000 FTEs, okay? So when we look at the models from DOE, the closest model that we may be able to pick, and I'm just doing this really simplistic, is 1,200 FTEs.
Okay.
So that means I know that I believe that I'm going to earn 1,000, but the model is 1,200, and that's what they're basing my revenue on. So I have to take that other 200 FTEs, whatever the equivalent of revenue is for that, and I have to set that aside, because unless I earn it, I can't use it. But now, an FTE reserve for unanticipated is where we may have an actual fluctuation within the FTE that we projected.
And
Okay.
and can I just back up there and that, so the 200 that you held back in your example, what that really means is that that's just money we're not going to budget. Because if we budgeted those dollars and we were short, well, then we would be in a world of trouble.
That is money, you're right, it's money that I'm going to budget,
Right,
holding it
right,
back, but
right.
I'm not going to allocate it out
Exactly.
for any purpose.
Exactly.
Because then when we have the second, the third calculation,
short.
the fourth calculation, they're gonna take that money from me.
Right,
And
exactly.
so that has to be transparent, or else we'd have to make reductions.
Well,
so the
yeah.
budget now is based on FTE out of November, right?
Well, yeah.
Future.
Typically, what happens is, it's in November. I think this year it may have even gone to January was the deadline to
Okay.
turn in the FTE. So this is based on the FTE that we projected in the model that we picked in January.
Thank you.
Okay? Okay, so that then brings me to your blue line, which is your $4.5 million of what I call operational flexibility. Okay, that's the money that can be used for increases in utilities, salaries, benefits, all those, insurance, all those sorts of things. The increases that we may have received for categoricals will have to be used for those specific purposes, which is always, appreciated, any increase. And then, so that is bottom line. So then what we will do is, through the budget process, we will present to you a balanced budget for the preliminary and tentative, and of course, we'll be working through, looking at the budget, looking at what our goals, our needs are, what our resources, where the priorities are, and so through discussions and with senior staff and schools, we will bring you a budget that's balanced and provide all the resources that we possibly can within the dollars we have to work with.
Well, I just want to say this is excellent work. Thank you for breaking this out this way. And now I understand why we have to, as Mr. Bryant says, manage our resources rather than cut our resources. Because and I know you're so precise and you don't like it when I ballpark figure things. But if I took the blue line,
Yes, sir.
the $4.5 million, and divided it by 30,000 students, I come up with about a $151 increase per student. And those discretionary dollars, or what you called operational flexibility. And as I remember at one time, it took about $200 per student for us to kind of be where we need to be in terms of increases in insurance, retirement, and those kinds of things. So if that's acceptable, ballpark figure, now I understand what the problem is.
And I'd add, in relation to our total budget, while I certainly appreciate what the legislature did, it's less
Right.
than 1%.
Yeah, there you go. That's right.
And I would just have to ask, is that peeling the onion all the way down to the bottom?
Yeah, I mean, this is the total potential operational flexibility money that you have is 4.5 million. And then the other side of the coin, of course, is looking at what your potential increases are, you know, for whatever purpose.
Can you
So-
leave us with a bright spot?
The bright spot is that that
Better
it
than
is
it
more
was.
money than we had last year, because last year we received 47 cents per student, so that certainly is a bright spot.
So are we still looking to find that $4 million cut
As
level
we-
there?
As we're working through the budget, you know, we'll be looking at programs, we'll be looking at district
That's still
level.
the number? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you're roughly $50 short per student, is another way of looking at it.
For our current expenses.
That's right. Good point. Current expenses.
Mhm. Does anybody have any other questions?
Thank you.
And of
Yeah,
course,
just
as we
thank
go
you.
through the budget process, I
Great
mean, we'll
work.
be
It's
talking.
very,
Thank
very
you.
helpful.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. All right, any comments, anyone else, superintendent, board members on this particular matter?
Well, I just want to say, as someone coming onto the board, coming from another situation and not having the experience that many of the other board members have with this, from this perspective, I think maybe I see it more from a perspective of a citizen. And what is frustrating is when you read news reports and all that, that's what the public sees, is this, you know, and like you said, I'm grateful to the governor and to this legislative time that we got more, but the public doesn't see this. And then when they hear, you know, why are we managing our money that tends to be taking things out, it's frustrating. And I know it's frustrating me when I'm hearing all this great stuff, yay, and yet, when you bring it down, I don't think they understand all the categories that we have that have to be spent just on that. And the flow-through things that, you know, that we have that, you know, yeah, it's great to give those awards to best and brightest and the A schools and all that. That really is just money that we're custodians of. We're just moving it out. So I don't know if there's a way that our board or our district can somehow get some of this information out to the public so that they're aware. I know they may be watching now and hear some of it, but in general, if we could find a way to get that out there, maybe we wouldn't have to be so much feeling a little bit defensive of the things, the changes we have to make to make sure that we're in that balanced budget, but yet we're doing the best for our students and our employees.
No, and I hear you, and it's always good to get that information out. And I just go back to, once again, imagine if we didn't get this increase. Imagine if we were funded at the level that we were the previous year.
Right.
So the increase that we do have, I think, is important. And I think going back to what Ms. Gallen just said, looking at our current expenses, I think we have to live within our means and look at our current expenses and make the best decisions possible, and that's what we will do.
All right, so looking at our agenda, let's go back and take a look at it then. Any other matters that may properly come before the school board? So I don't have anything. And I think the next time, I'll just say this, that we'll gather here again on Friday. Is that
Yes, sir.
right? For the special hearing. And the time of that, Ms. Crawford, I think is at 9 o'clock?
That's good.
All right, so unless there's anything else.
I
Mr.
just
Klein?
do.
Sure.
I just want to thank my esteemed colleague here, Mr. Destin, for bringing up this issue with Lowery Place. Again, 3 of us were on the board when all this was going on, and it kind of, after August 2017, it just went off the radar. And it wasn't intentional. There was more pressing issues, but I do want to thank you for bringing this up, because I think it is something we need to discuss, and, having this special workshop to do that. Mr. Chambers, I also want to say thank you for your comments about us as a whole owning up to the budget from, last year and things like those things, and that we are doing our best to, like we said, manage the finances of the people's money. And but I think it's a right step that, yes, we can say all those things, Tallahassee, but this is Okaloosa, and we are, doing the best with what we can, with what we have. But I do want to thank you for actually taking that step there. So, but with that being said, I think that was in the right direction there.
Appreciate it. All right, we're good. So this workshop is adjourned.
Thank you.
Go, go, go.